Our next presenter is Hanna Suzuki, and the chair for this session is Konomi Karube.
So the next presenter is Hanna Suzuki from Bedford High School in Massachusetts, presenting modeling and visualizing the impact of pets on household well-being.
Thank you for the introduction. Let me share my visualizing the impact of pets on household well-being. So as we all know, pets and families, well, as you know, families spend a lot of time and money on their pets. Last year in 2024, 87 million households at least had one pet, and they spent over $150 billion on them annually. And on average, pet owners spent about 44 minutes a day for pet care. And that is very similar to and comparable to the time allocated to grocery shopping, which was about 46 minutes, and the time to prepare food and drinks, which was about 53 minutes. Additionally, 97% of pet owners consider their own pets to be a part of their family. And since pets become such a vital part of the family, they should be considered in the economics of the household as any other household members are. However, pets have barely been analyzed in economics or really any other disciplines. And so this work develops an economic model that describes the household decisions on pet ownership and caregiving. This model considers this by considering the economic parameters or considers the key parameters in this decision making, such as the number of welfare and pets, number and welfare of pets, the cost of pet ownership, the time spent on the pet care, and the household well-being. Additionally, this model also applies standard economic principles such as the utility maximization and the law of diminishing marginal utility. Now, this model builds on an existing economic theory of fertility, and this is assuming that the demand for pets is analogous to the demand for children. This work also conducts a cost-benefit analysis. It finds the relationships among the parameters in the model, and it also derives the condition to maximize the household well-being or the utility by having pets. And additionally, it also visualizes the utility landscape with empirical data. Now, this proposed model defines a optimization problem in which the household maximizes its well-being or utility as a rational economic agent. So this here is the utility function. Let me just turn on the laser point. This is the utility function here. It has two terms, as you can see. The first term is the household consumption or standard of living, which is how much money you spend for a living. And then the second term here is the companionship with pets. So the utility from companionship is dependent on the number of pets, N here, and then also the welfare of your pets, which is Q. Now, this is assuming that you'll most likely be happier if you have more pets and also happier pets. The pet welfare Q is also defined like this with C. C is the amount of care you give to your pets. And this means that more care most likely means more pet happiness. And so this that's why if you increase the care, your pets will most likely be more happy. However, that relationship isn't linear. So that's why the Q is a irrational function of C, using beta, which is in between 0 and 1. And so this can be substituted into the original utility function to get the updated one, like so. Now, this model considers two different types of constraints, for money and for time. For the money constraint, the household budget is shown as W times L, which is the hourly wage and the number of working hours, which is W and L. And then that's allocated, the budget is allocated to the household consumption, which is S, and PCN, which is the cost of pet care. P is the unit cost of pet care, C is the amount of pet care, and then N is the number of pets. The time constraint, on the other hand, is shown as a ratio. The total amount of like available time is 1. And then that time is allocated to L, which is your working hours, and TN, which is the pet care hours. T is the caregiving time for one pet, and then N is the number of pets. These two constraints are then combined into one like this, where the household wage is now allocated to the consumption, S, as well as the cost of pets. Now, WT here is multiplying the hourly wage with the time spent for pet care. This in economics is called the opportunity cost. And it's essentially the amount of money that you could have earned with the time that you instead decided to spend with a pet. PC is the product of the unit cost of pet care and also the amount of care. So it's the cost of the pet care. And so the sum of this is the cost of one pet. And so that's multiplied by N to get the cost of N pets. And so this combined constraint is then used to update the utility function like this. This proposed model has a few important characteristics. First, it takes into account the well-being of pets as well as the number of pets, because as I said earlier, it should contribute to the household well-being. The model also considers caregiving time in its time constraint. And so since pets are obviously not objects, the household needs to keep spending time in its time constraint and for pets. Additionally, the model follows the law of diminishing marginal utility in economics. And so this means, for example, if you have a pet right now, and then if you get 2 pets rather than 1, your well-being might double. But if you get, say, 5 pets or 10 pets, your well-being or your happiness most likely wouldn't go up 5 times happier or 10 times happier. And so that's why the utility function uses logarithms and irrational terms. Now that we have a utility function that considers both the budget and time constraints, we can derive the conditions to maximize that utility by taking the derivative of the function. So the utility peaks when the derivative becomes 0. And so here is the partial derivative of u. This one is the respect of the number of pets n, meaning that n varies because it's a variable, but the other variable c stays constant. And the derivative shows that alpha over n, which is a positive term, indicates the marginal benefit as the number of pets increase. That's subtracted by BT plus PC, which is the marginal cost. And so the optimal number of pets n can be determined when that benefit and cost balance out. And we could do the very similar analysis to determine the optimal amount of care by finding that partial derivative of u, but with respect to c, like shown here. Oh. So from the previous slide, the optimal number of pets, n star, like shown here, and the optimal amount of pet care, c star, are derived like this. And also the optimal household consumption, S star, is derived to be W minus alpha. W is the hourly wage, and so alpha indicates how much money you're willing to spend for pets. Now that the theory part is over, I decided to do some computational experiments with the model. So based on some public data sets from the US government agencies and some other organizations, I obtained and estimated the constant values for this model, like shown in this table. And I then used it for this graph, which shows how the utility value changes in the average US household by varying the variables, which are the number of pets n and the amount of pet care. So the peak you can see is at this small dot here. This is the peak at where the utility function or the utility is maximized. And so here, the optimal number of pets is computed to be 1.72. Now, this graph shows the optimal caregiving time when the household has just one pet, since we just saw that the optimal number of pets is 1.72, which is 1. The x-axis here represents the hourly wage W, and the y-axis here represents the optimal caregiving time. So in this graph, you can see the possible ranges of the optimal caregiving time at different values of alpha, gamma, and obviously hourly wage. So for example, let's say your wage is $50 and the alpha is 2.5. As I mentioned earlier, alpha indicates how much money you're willing to spend on pet care. And so alpha being 2.5 means you're willing to spend 5% of your income for a pet. So under that assumption, your optimal caregiving time ranges between 22 and 32 minutes with different gamma values. So from these computational experiments, I found 3 key findings. First, as your wage increases, you need to decrease your caregiving time because your opportunity cost, that amount of money that you could have earned, becomes higher because you're losing more by spending time with your pet instead of working. And the downward slope of these lines show this. Second, as the alpha increases, meaning you're willing to spend more time and money on pet care, you should spend more time with your pet because, well, you'll be happier. And you can see this on the graph. As the alpha increases, clearly your time, optimal time is increasing. And the third finding is that you can decrease your caregiving time by increasing the efficiency of your pet care, which is expressed by gamma. So, for example, you can consider maybe using smart pet tech products, such as automatic feeders or self-cleaning litter boxes. And so, in conclusion, this work develops an economic model to conduct a cost-benefit analysis for pet ownership and visualizes the relationship among the parameters in this model. As future work, I plan to extend the model further and examine some alternative models. Thank you for listening. That concludes my project.
Yeah, it's nice presentation, Hannah. I have quick question. Like you did this study only on a general pet, but there is no differentiation between like dog or cat. So is
So at
there
this
any
moment, no. Yes, it is
okay.
in general for pets. The data I used, like for example, to determine like the constant values based off of the past data, like the public data sets, those are based
Okay.
off of data for like dogs and cats, but most of those data were kind of generalized with just pets. But
Oh, okay.
it is a interesting point, and so maybe in the future it would be interesting to kind of differentiate, like because I'm assuming like
Yeah.
different pets might use different number of times to care for them.
Yeah, that's good. Yeah. Yeah. Wonderful work, by the way.
Thank you.
So, yeah, that's